Fear Zone, your channel for supernatural horror stories. Today, I'm going to tell a story that I lived many years ago, back when I was just a teenager. An event that marked my life forever. At that time, I lived with my mother and siblings on a secluded farm in the city of Werewolves, Brazil. My father was known for his severe temper, and honestly, we all feared his wrath. He didn't hesitate to impose harsh punishments, making our daily life always tense. I remember one specific day when things went out of control. After a fight at school, I knew punishment would be inevitable when I got home. Just imagining my father's expression, I could already feel fear growing inside me. When I arrived at the gate, there he was, standing at the entrance, with a belt in his hands and that furious look that froze me. He probably already knew everything. Maybe the principal had called to tell him what happened. At that moment, a single thought consumed my mind: to run away. Without thinking twice, I turned around and ran back to the road, before he could see me. I walked down long dirt roads, passing through fields and forests. The idea of escaping for a few days seemed like the only solution. Maybe, over time, my father's anger would fade, and I could return home without facing such severe punishment. But as hours passed and night fell, the feeling of freedom was replaced by fear. The road seemed endless, and the silence of the night was broken only by the sound of my own footsteps. The cold intensified, and hunger began to take over me. I knew that the nearest village was still far away. Still, I kept walking, but as time passed, my courage began to fade. Fatigue started to weigh on me, and I knew I had no choice but to return home. I decided to take the same path I had walked before, but then something strange happened. While walking down the dark road, surrounded by trees and dense vegetation, a disturbing sound came from the forest beside me. I heard something running between the trees, as if it were following me. My heart raced, and without thinking, I dropped to the ground, hiding among the bushes. The sound grew louder, and then came the growls. It wasn't a normal sound, it wasn't just any animal. The growls were deep, threatening, as if something was there, watching me, waiting for the right moment to attack. My whole body froze in fear, and all I could think about was what would happen next. I remained motionless, crouched and hidden, as the sound slowly faded away. The silence that followed was even more disturbing, as if the very air was conspiring against me. I knew that any wrong move could attract whatever was out there. Fear paralyzed me, but I needed to find a safe place. That's when I remembered a nearby farm I had seen along the way. Still, I stayed there for a few minutes, motionless, trying to calm myself, until I heard a distant howl. My blood ran cold. I thought, it must be that beast. The sound was terrifying, like it came straight out of a nightmare. I took advantage of the moment of silence and, with slow and careful steps, I stood up. I decided to head toward the farm, walking in the hope of finding shelter or maybe even spending the night hidden there. But something inside me told me that this night was far from over. With my heart racing and my hands trembling, I reached the farm. I climbed over the property fence and headed toward a barn I spotted further ahead. The silence of the night was broken only by the distant sounds of animals, but then, again, I heard those growls that had frightened me on the road. It was the same sinister sound, as if that beast had been following me since the beginning. Soon after, I heard the sound of barking. I recognized it as the farm dogs, but the darkness was so thick that I couldn't see anything clearly. All I knew was that those growls seemed to come from something much bigger and more threatening than any ordinary dog. The fear grew even more, especially since the farm dogs, large and fierce, could be a new problem for me. Cornered, I looked around and noticed that the corral was closed. That's when I spotted a cassava plantation nearby and decided that would be my hiding place. However, before I could move, something terrifying happened. I saw a shadow. It was near the farm fence, watching me. Its eyes glowed in the darkness like two burning embers, intense and piercing, like headlights from a car. At that moment, I realized that this was no ordinary animal. My body was taken over by a paralyzing fear. This creature seemed straight out of my worst nightmares, something I never imagined encountering in real life. The feeling of being hunted was overwhelming, and I knew I had to act fast to survive. I soon thought, This beast was the same one growling near the road, and I ran to the cassava field, lying down between the leaves, trying to hide. My whole body was shaking, and the cold of the earth made my heart beat even faster. But then, the terrifying sounds returned. I heard the noise of the leaves being moved, a constant and disturbing sound. It was as if the creature was entering the field, searching for me. With each step it took, the leaves rustled, and the sound grew louder and louder. I could hear it sniffing, as if it were trying to catch my scent, accompanied by those threatening growls that made me lose all hope of escaping. Motionless, I remained lying on the ground, doing my best to control my breathing and make as little noise as possible. I shut my eyes tightly, mentally begging for the worst not to happen. The feeling that whatever it was right behind me, ready to attack, almost drove me to despair. My thoughts were a mess, but I knew only one thing. At any moment, this could be the end. Then, suddenly, a new sound brought me a glimmer of hope. One of the farm dogs passed near the plantation, likely drawn by the noises of the creature moving, and began to bark. Soon, the other dogs joined in, and the sound of furious barking took over the air until I heard them running toward the plantation. The next noise that came was terrifying. Barks and growls mixed into a violent fight. The struggle between the dogs and the creature stirred the cassava leaves, as if the plantation itself were alive. This was my chance. Taking advantage of the chaos, I crawled out of the field, trying to move without drawing attention. As soon as I was at a safe distance, I stood up and ran as fast as I could toward the farm's barn, not daring to look back. When I reached the barn, I found an open window and slipped inside, still gasping and consumed by terror. Even though I was terrified, I couldn't take my eyes off what was happening outside. The farm dogs fought with impressive courage, but it was clear they were at a disadvantage. The creature emerged from the plantation, and then something I would never forget happened. It stood up on two legs, like a man. In the dim light of the night, its silhouette appeared colossal and menacing. My heart nearly stopped. There was no doubt, that was a werewolf. The dogs' barks echoed through the property as they attacked with everything they had. I saw one of them leap onto the creature, but it, with superhuman strength, grabbed the animal with its huge hands and threw it like a toy. The impact sounded brutal and made my blood run cold. The other two dogs didn't give up and launched themselves at the werewolf's legs, biting fiercely. For a few seconds, it seemed like they might defeat it. But the creature let out a deafening growl, swinging its legs and throwing the dogs aside as if they were nothing. Furious, the creature moved back onto all fours, and then, with a quick motion, it shot into the darkness, disappearing into the vastness of the farm. The silence that followed was almost as terrifying as the presence of the monster. I stayed there, paralyzed, staring at the property, waiting for the creature to return at any moment. But it didn't show up again. Exhausted and still trembling with fear, I finally gave in to the fatigue. There was nowhere else to go. Leaning against the corner of the barn, with my head full of horrifying images, I fell asleep right there, seeking temporary refuge in that night that seemed to have come straight out of a nightmare. When the sun finally rose on the horizon, lighting up the farm, I woke up with my body heavy and my mind still confused. As I stood up, my gaze was drawn to one of the farm dogs, who was severely injured. It was clear that this was the result of the confrontation with the creature. A sense of urgency took over me again. I needed to leave. Without thinking twice, I gathered my things and headed down the dirt road, with the sole goal of going back home. Every step I took seemed to echo the memory of that bizarre night. As soon as I arrived, my mother spotted me from a distance. Her face was marked with a worry I had never seen before. She ran to meet me and, with a trembling voice, asked, "What happened, my son?" I tried to answer, but the words came out in a disjointed way. Still, I did my best to explain everything that had happened. The werewolf, the dogs, the fight, the fear. It was such an absurd story that I could barely believe what I was saying myself. My mother listened patiently, but the look on her face made it clear she didn't believe me. In the end, she simply said that this should serve as a lesson for me not to make reckless decisions again. My father, on the other hand, didn't scold me. To my surprise, he seemed more relieved that I was back than ready to reprimand me. He stayed silent, but that silence spoke volumes more than any words could. The days that followed were strange. I couldn't shake the image of the werewolf from my mind. It felt as though the presence of that creature still lurked in the shadows of the region. I began to keep watch over the house at night, gripped by the fear that it might return. I wouldn't let my brothers play in the yard after it got dark, and I found myself listening for any unusual sounds, my heart racing. My father, concerned that it might be a dangerous animal, organized searches around the neighborhood. He searched for the creature and warned the other residents, but no one found any trace of it. Despite that, I could never feel completely safe. Time passed, and the story of the werewolf faded into the background, but the questions inside me remained. Why did this happen to me? Was it just a coincidence, being in the wrong place at the wrong time? Or was the creature there for some specific reason, maybe to prevent me from continuing my escape? To this day, those questions echo in my mind, unanswered. And so ends this supernatural and frighteningly real story that I lived. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for listening, and good night.
Fear Zone, your channel of real horror stories. And now, let's go to today's account, which is from Mr. Pedro, and this happened to him in the city of Morelia, which is in Brazil, and at that time, that was in the year 2001, Mr. Pedro was 45 years old. And today, I'm going to tell, when I came across head-on, the werewolf who attacked several ranches in my town. And it all starts like this. I work as a delivery man for vegetables and fruits for the verjos of the city, and sometimes I make deliveries of loads of chickens as well, and I have a truck to do this kind of service. One day, I went to make several deliveries of loads of chickens in a neighboring town, and so I stopped my truck in several places that day, making the deliveries of the load of chickens, and when I finished the service, which was already the night, I ended up coming back at my house. With that, I was resting for a while and watching TV in the living room, and soon I slept. However, when it was close to midnight, I woke up and decided to wash the bucket of the truck to take away the smell of chicken. So I went to my backyard, which was a ranch, with shed in the back where I kept my vehicle. Well, I climbed into the body of the truck and began to remove the empty wooden boxes, and this, when I looked at the bush next to the fence of the ranch, I saw something moving in the thicket, but as it was very dark the vegetation, I could not see what it was. Of course, I was already on alert and looking around the bush, trying to see what that was. Even so, I kept working, removing the boxes from the top of the truck, and after a few minutes, suddenly, I heard some footsteps of something running near my truck. I went to look, but I stayed on top of the vehicle, and this I saw a creature hiding behind the head of my truck. I was startled, because it seemed to be the kind of huge dog, and his eyes were lit, and it was just watching me. I was surprised all this, for this animal was hiding from me, and it seemed that this animal was waiting for me to come down from the back of the truck so that it could attack me. With that, I did a test and pretended to get off the body of the truck, but to my surprise, the animal saw me, and he came out from behind the head of the truck and came running at me. However, I went back to the bucket, but the animal almost caught me. At this point, I was startled, but I looked around the truck, and the beast was already gone. Of course, I was worried about my family. I had to solve this quickly, and while I was thinking about what to do, suddenly, I heard a noise in the body of the vehicle, and when I looked, I was startled, because that beast had managed to climb fast in the body, and came running towards me. At this time, I jumped out of the bucket of the truck, and fell to the ground in a bad way, and when I went to get up to run, my leg was bruised, and I don't know if I had broken my leg, but my foot hurt a lot, but there was no way. I started running and went to hide in the back of the shed, and turned off the light of the place, and then I hid behind some boxes. Well, I didn't understand why the creature didn't chase me. I looked at the back of the truck, and I saw this creature standing, only on two legs, as if it were a man. Then I was more afraid, because for me, this beast was a werewolf. The fact is that this monster was pushing the wooden boxes from the body. Maybe he thought that there was some chicken on top of the truck because of the strong smell of chicken. And this, I kept thinking, that luckily, because Werewolf did not come after me when I ran away from him, because my leg was bruised because of the fall when I fell from the top of the truck. Looking again at the body of the vehicle, the werewolf got out of the bucket of the vehicle and disappeared, and as I could not see him, I began to worry about my family. And with that, I acted fast and took courage, and even limping with my leg, I ran to the cab of the truck and started the vehicle, and with the light of the headlight, I saw the creature walking standing near the door of my residence. I was afraid and frightened, because the door of my house was just leaning. I turned the vehicle in the direction of the creature, and with the light of the headlight, the creature was startled, and it got on 4 legs, and ran to the back of the ranch. At that moment, my dogs realized that something was wrong on the property, and they showed up. I got out of the cab of the vehicle, and ran to my house, kept calm and told my wife that it was just an animal that invaded our ranch, and that nothing had happened, and that I only twisted my foot, but warned my wife that such a beast might still be in the yard. However, I took my shotgun and went into the living room, and sometimes I would look out the crack in the window, trying to find this creature, and I would shoot with the shotgun if I saw this werewolf, for he had made me angry, for he had surrounded the door of my house. Well, the hours went by, and the werewolf no longer appeared in my place, and soon the day cleared, and so I was more relaxed. Eventually, I became concerned that this creature was prowling my region at night, and that creature could kill anyone who crossed its path. So, I had to do something. I took my shotgun and various ammunition, and together with a neighbor, who was a friend, we went into the thicket to find the clues that led to this creature. Prowling through the woods, we saw a man sitting under a tree, and this stranger was passing some bandages on his arm, for he seemed wounded. We got close to this suspect, but he saw us, and this man went into the bushes of the woods quickly and disappeared. I was unhappy with that, for I was going to warn him of the creature, but then I saw a little blood on the ground, and it sure was from that suspicious man. After that we walked some more, but there was no clue of the creature, and with that my neighbor and I decided to go back to our houses, and we went back. At this I passed near a place, and saw an old redneck bandaging his dog. I knew this gentleman, and asked what had hurt his dog. The old man told us that he woke up to the noises of his 2 dogs fighting with something. Then he looked quickly out the window, and in this he saw a strange animal inside his chicken coop. So the old redneck went to get his gun, but when he came out in the yard, the animal was already gone. But then he saw his dogs injured from having faced the bizarre creature. Well, at that moment I thought of the wanderer in the woods. Because he was wounded, I asked this gentleman, who could be a man who had entrance in his yard, and the old man confirmed that it was an animal indeed. Of course, after that conversation, I went back to my house, but turning on the clues, I kept calculating that maybe that injured guy from the thicket was the werewolf that came into my ranch, and I may be right, because the suspect who was injured, I didn't see this man anymore. And it could be that the wanderer, turned into a werewolf, was injured by the old man's ranch dogs. However, the years have passed, but when I make truck deliveries, I stay alert when it is a load of chickens, and I leave my gun in the bag, because the smell of the birds attract the werewolf. Good guys, thanks for watching the video. If you liked the story, subscribe to the channel and leave your like, and also turn on the Tinkerbell notifications to receive new videos of creepypasta werewolves, scary stories werewolves, true horror stories, audiobook werewolves, tales prevails, encounters werewolves, dogmen, skinwalkers, and more. Fear Zone, your channel of horror